right? Maybe you are lying in bed with the lights low, or cooking as the warm air fills your home, or driving through quiet roads where the mind drifts into wonder. Wherever you are, welcome. You have joined a place where ancient history is told slowly, softly, and in full. Here we explore forgotten chapters written in stone and silence. Tonight we travel back to Europe long before humans, when a strange and powerful monkey walked upright with a dog-like face and an uncanny presence. Share with us how you listen in the comments below. And if these journeys stir something in you, subscribe and stay close, because the story of the past has only just begun. Long before the first humans set their feet on European soil, when forests stretched wide across valleys and thick canopies turned daylight into shadow, there lived a creature unlike any you might expect. It was not a great ape like those we imagine in Africa. It was not an ancestor who would lead to us. Yet, it was also not only a monkey in the way we know monkeys today. Its name given by science is Paradelopythecus, a strange, uncanny primate that carried itself upright, walking the ground on two legs with the bearing of something more human than the jungle dwellers of its time. The world it inhabited was unsettled. Predators moved in silence through grass and trees. Huge cats with eyes that gleamed in the dusk. Strange hoofed animals filled the fields. Climates shifted between warmth and cold, pushing every creature to adapt or to vanish. In this restless stage of Europe's forgotten prehistory, Paradelopythecus managed tricks of survival that made it stand apart, muscular like a baboon, with a muzzle that seemed almost canine, and a body balanced between agility and strength. Its upright gait was no small detail, because while many primates today rise occasionally on two legs, here was a creature that depended on it far more. Fossils first uncovered in 1903 told the story of hips and limbs shaped for regular bipedal motion, not the permanent stride of a human, but enough to shift how it saw the world. Standing higher gave advantage to scan the trees, to look over grass waving in the wind for signs of predators waiting, or fruit and tubers ready for gathering. This too was survival written in bone. For a long time, many wondered if it was part of the great chain of humanity. Yet its place seems closer to a parallel spark of evolution, an alternate sketch drawn by nature, never destined to reach the same page as us. Still, the thought that another walker on two legs once roamed Europe before our kind arrived is enough to bend the imagination. This is where our story begins, with a creature now hidden in stone records and fragments of teeth and bone, yet once alive in the living silence of European forests. A mirror both familiar and unsettling, a being that walked upright yet carried a tail, muscular and strange, close to us and yet forever other. And through its memory, we see how many possible paths evolution might have taken, and how easily our own might never have come to be. The forests of ancient Europe spread in endless shades of green, broken only where rivers curved through valleys, or where uplands rose in stony outcrops against the sky. The trees grew tall and close, oaks and beeches in damp lowlands, pines and firs climbing the colder slopes. The ground was thick with fallen leaves, beneath which roots curled into the earth. Streams whispered their way across moss-covered rocks, carrying with them scents of soil and water. And among these landscapes, life pressed forward in countless shapes. Here, before the first humans had ever looked upon these forests, another creature had found its rhythm, its name unknown to itself, yet later given by us as Paradelopythecus, the uncanny monkey of Europe, its body never as mighty as the great apes, never as small as the nimblest monkeys, but walking upright in a way that caught the eye, its steps steady in the dappled light, its muscles heavy but drawn for agility as well as power. The muzzle gave it something almost canine, a dog-like thrust of jaw that seemed strange upon a primate body, yet not ugly, only different. Its tail swayed as it moved, a reminder of its place beyond our lineage. And yet its upright walk brought a fleeting echo of ourselves in a time when we did not yet exist here. The morning air, filled with a thin veil of mist birds, rose from the edges of the forest. Canopy their cries, carrying across the valley larger shadows. Moved as deer-like animals emerged from cover to graze the grasses, and in the distance, the low growl of a predator rumbled muted as if the earth itself had given warning. Paradelopythecus stood upright among the trees, eyes lifted above the tall grass to draw in the view. Nostrils flaring for scent as much as ears for sound, being upright widened its knowledge of the world. Dangers could be marked early, food spotted sooner. While other monkeys clung to the branches, it found its strength upon the ground, lifting its head above the reeds and shrubs, scanning horizons unseen to four-legged runners. It pressed forward with heavy yet balanced strides, gathering tubers at the edge of a stream bed, pulling fruits from low shrubs, foraging almost endlessly. For in this wild age hunger was never wholly silenced. It lingered even after meals, urging each creature to search further. This life was no easy passage. Predators watched from shadows. Great cats moved silently through trees. Bears shifted boulders with their paws in search of roots. Birds of prey hung like suspended leaves above in the sky, always waiting, always watching. Yet despite this, Paradelopythecus endured, its upright walk giving a strange grace to its survival, an alternate vision of what a primate could become under the shaping hand of evolution. The world surrounding it held countless wonders, the air scented with pine from the high ridges, the pollen of spring spills, from flowers decorating forest floors, insects glittering in shafts of light, slipping through canopies, rivers alive with shoals of fish, bright like living silver frogs, croaking under reeds, and turtles shifting slowly upon muddy edges. Each life form held its own story. Yet only in Paradelopythecus did this story bend so near to our own, near but not ours, reflecting pathways that almost spoke of humanity yet turned aside, a tale of parallel possibility. Millions of years lay between us, yet across that gulf of time, the simple act of standing tall upon two legs threads us hauntingly together. Imagine it outlined in the forest gloom, tail swaying shoulders, hunched head lifting to taste the breeze, its presence unsettling halfway between familiar and strange. Among its kind, these traits passed naturally, not special to them, but ordinary, an adaptation driven by pressure older than thought, by the constant need to see more, to reach further, to remain alive another day. No language connected them, no songs or carvings on stone, yet their world was thick with communication nonetheless. Gestures of warning, scents left upon branches, sounds rising sharply when predators came near, and soft grunts in the company of others. Small bands moved together, for no one thrived alone in this land. Children clung to mothers, males guarded the edges, the group acting as one fabric stretched thin across dangerous ground. The fossils that later told their story lay hidden beneath layers of earth. Yet here in this age, each step they took left soft prints in mud, washed away by rains. Each fruit bitten gave only a momentary trace before vanishing, their daily acts impermanent, fragile, yet shaping their survival. There were no monuments, no long-lived markers of their presence, only the living bodies carrying their line forward in blood and breath, a legacy written in the quiet persistence of being. And still, around them, the shifts of earth never ended. Seasons curved from warmth to cold with a harshness greater than our modern measure. Sudden freezes, sudden thaws, storms of rain and snow dragging the land between extremes. In those swells of change, Paradelopythecus found its test, its bipedal stance honed by the need to adjust, to travel, to search wider. When food waned along one glade, the group had to cross fields, wading rivers, climbing slopes, always moving, searching for what the land might offer. Upright walking freed the hands to hold, to carry, to pull, not tools as we would one day make, but food gathered and taken for later. Infants lifted and born, branches moved aside. Those who survived longest watched the signs of the earth closely. They learned to read the call of familiar birds as signals of predators near, to sense the silence where normally insects hummed, to taste the change in air before storms. These lessons passed not in language, but in behavior, seen, mirrored, absorbed by young eyes and remembering bodies. Life was short, yet in that briefness, unbroken by thought of time, their species flourished for generations, centuries beyond counting, filling a chapter in Europe's prehistory that remains dim to us. Yet no less remarkable, Paradelopythecus walked here before us, marking the soil with steps that spoke of another way to be. And now, long after footprints vanished, bone fragments tell us of hips turned for bipedal weight, of spines that curved to strange balances, of tails that swayed even as bodies stood tall. Their existence whispers of a Europe filled not with people, but with alternate walkers, strange mirrors glowing faintly behind the curtain of our own emergence. The canopy arched overhead like a living ceiling, woven from branches that shifted subtly with the wind. Light fractured softly through the leaves and drifted down in broken beams, falling upon a forest floor that was alive with sound and movement. The rustle of creatures stirring, the hum of insects hiding in damp soil, the chatter of distant birds greeting the new day, and below this chorus, the band of Paradelopythecus stirred to life. Each morning began not as a sudden rising, but as a slow ripple of movement, one adult adjusting sleep position, another lifting its head, then others following in quiet rhythm. The young pressed close through the night, now stretched and yawned, small tails flicking across the mossy ground. They clung to their mothers first. Unwilling to break away too soon, the adults regarded their surroundings with careful eyes, pausing to listen, pausing to scent the wind before leaving the safety of the sheltered hollow. Their nights were never fully safe, for the forest edge was home not only to herbivores, but to hunters of silent tread. Saber-toothed cats waited in this world beyond light. Bears turned stones in search of roots. Wolves ran lean along the edges of valleys, and owls swept down without sound to gather the smaller moving lives of the dark. Paradelopythecus survived such nights only by closeness. Safety not in solitary habit, but in the warmth and watchfulness of the group. And through each dawn they rose again, because life pressed ever forward. Hunger did not wait, nor did thirst, nor the inevitable need to care for the young. And so they stepped into the day, their upright gait giving a peculiar grace to their foraging, not wholly human, yet not wholly animal in form as we know it. Their bodies built to be both of the trees and of the ground, the adults spread slowly, one listening for the wings above, another sniffing the air for the sour traces of predators, while the females with infants busied themselves with fruiting shrubs, berries dark against the leaves, their juice staining the fur of both mother and child. Juveniles climbed short trees, pulling small branches until fruit rained down, and limbs bent under their weight, shouts and squawks filling the morning calm with a chorus of urgency and demand. Food was eaten quickly. Meals never lingered long, because time in the open stretched risk. Yet they were skillful in speed tubers clawed out with nimble fingers bark, stripped insects probed from rotting wood frogs and small fish. Seized near the bank, carried by hands consumed in an instant, the forest provided, but it demanded that every mouth knew where to look, and every hand knew how to seize. The young learned all of this in silence. No words told them what to do, yet every action of their elders traced instruction. When one juvenile watched an adult push aside leaves to uncover fruit fallen below, the copy followed naturally. When another saw roots dug, the imitation grew, until entire repertoires of behavior were passed as a culture of survival without need for speech. The upright stance of Paradelopythecus made this exchange more striking, the young clinging at the knee level of mothers, who stood tall, copying the rise of posture testing, their balance taking halting steps, tails curled and swayed, and each successful standing was celebrated with shrieks of joy. Survival was not without play. The forest always echoed with both lessons and laughter. Predators shaped their days as much as fruit or roots did, and always the eyes scanning from higher view gave them seconds that others did not have. When the grasses bent in ways that wind alone could not explain, one male stiffened, rising further upon hind limbs, ears flat, hands gripping the bark of a nearby tree. When the tension spread through the group, a sudden call rose. Bodies scattered upward into branches or slipped behind boulders, and in the clearing ahead, a shape padded through, jaws wide and heavy, coated in striped shadow. A cat with teeth long as knives seeking prey. The moment passed like lightning. The predator did not strike them that day, but the energy hung in the air long after. The group regrouped slowly. Infants clung tighter. Mothers smoothed fur with tired touches. Males tested the air even when danger had disappeared. Trust was not given easily in this landscape. Safety could return in minutes, but fear lingered longer. When rains arrived, they began with scent before sound, the air holding dampness, clouds brooding low across the canopy. And soon water poured among the trees, the ground breathing steam as warm drops cooled soil. Paradelopythecus moved in such weather with practiced skill, seeking hollows beneath stone ridges, clumps of trees woven so tightly with branches that the rain struck above but not below. Here they huddled, grooming each other, watching small streams form channels, licking water caught in their fur. Even storms carried gifts fruits knocked down by winds. Softened wood revealed insects' pools forming in leaves, provided drinking water to younger ones. They understood these rhythms without analysis life, written in pulse and patience, water falling water, going always returning. The seasons shaped their bodies more than any single predator. Winter pressed hunger sharper than teeth ever could. Snow fell heavy here, covering plants, driving animals into migration, and leaving behind a quieter, harsher land. Paradelopythecus survived these months by memory, returning to caches of roots buried earlier, stripping bark that held faint nourishment, digging beneath snow for shoots still clinging to life. Their fur thickened, their groups drew closer for warmth, and every movement was made with effort. Spring was different. Spring was a torrent. Blossoms spilled across trees, insects returned in swarms, fish darted upward in streams bloated with meltwater. Animals gave birth and filled the air with new cries. Food was everywhere. Foraging became easy, and time was suddenly opened. And this was when the young grew most swiftly, nourished by plenty, training their limbs in upright strides, running up slopes, testing their balance, reaching high with eager limbs. Through these rapid cycles of ease and strain, the creature we call Paradelopythecus carved centuries of existence, each generation repeating the acts of the former, none imagining change. Yet each body altered subtly, under pressures invisible in the moment. Hips shaping for more confident stride, spines twisting to bear weight upright, hands freed briefly for action. Evolution working in silence. As it always does, looking back across millions of years, we see hints of trajectory that never completed. A branch thick for a season and then broken. Compared to our own path, it seems incomplete. Yet within its own lifetime, it was nothing less than successful, thriving in the land it knew, filling the role the environment asked of it. Imagine a band gathering near a flooded stream after rainfall, moving along stones, their toes gripping edges expertly. One older male leading, his face marked by worn jaw and fading strength, younger ones darting side to side with energy, mothers carrying infants who pressed their eyes wide against the bustle of the group, tails shifting, hands busy, all moving toward the brighter clearing where food always collected after rains. The scene is entirely theirs, entirely real in its time, a picture of life as vivid as any carved painting on cave wall, only it left no mark beyond bone and soil cover, once gone, forgotten except for fragments uncovered ages later, where humans leave echoes in words and symbols. Paradelopythecus left presence only in the fact that it endured. It lived through cold and through storm. It walked upright under the same stars that later watched Homo erectus and eventually sapiens cross the same ground. And though it never built fire or shaped stone as we would, it belongs in the same great chorus of primates tested by survival. Their uncanny posture, remains their most haunting gift to us, standing upright but carrying a tail, walking forward but into extinction, showing in their passing that evolution is filled with roads untaken, roads that nearly ran alongside ours, but ended in silence. Evening returned each day, with long shadows and soft red skies slicing through the canopy. The group slowed then, drawing close, parents pulling the young in, males pushing into watchful positions. The forest grew quiet, birds folding into nests, predators stretching awake for their night of hunting. And in that pause of closing day, Paradelopythecus pressed into itself, a circle of breath and body and beating hearts, for safety could only be found together. Here the infants drifted into sleep, mothers grooming through fur, even as their own eyes closed, elders holding posture until shadows demanded slumber. And all the while the forest whispered, water dripping from leaves, owls beginning their calls, the rhythm of night folding itself over yet another day that was lived and survived. The forests of Europe in this forgotten age opened themselves as a world half known to us and half utterly alien. The canopy shimmered with green, yet the shape of the trees was older oaks and beeches rising thick and broad, trunked willows trailing their fingers at the edges of streams swollen with snowmelt, birches shedding lighter bark that slid across damp soil in curls. The scent of pine and damp moss filled the air, sharp yet strangely sweet, and beneath those high crowns the earth pulsed with endless voices. The ground was not quiet. It ticked and hummed with the rise of insects in the warming season, their wings catching faint light through the tangled leaves, each swarm itself a signal to those who lived here. Insects meant blossoms, blossoms meant fruit, fruit meant survival. Frogs croaked at the edge of marshes, matching rhythm with the low thrumming of distant wolves, and above it all, birds called and answered across wide spaces, shaping the memory of every dawn with their voices. Into this thicket of life moved the shape we call Paradelopythecus, its body tighter and more muscular than small monkeys we know today, its jaw drawn forward as if sculpted for another kind of mask. Yet its eyes bore the same depth and restlessness we read in primate faces still. But what broke the frame of expectation was not its jaw, nor its tail, nor its low canine hum. It was the way it moved. Time and again it rose upright, upon thighs grown heavy for such weight, spines curving into stance that held for long minutes, sometimes for hours, every stride baking this trait deeper into its existence. Its tail swaying behind, but not dragging, its hands freed in short bursts to hold or to carry, a strange foreshadowing of a destiny never reached. The young practiced relentlessly, not with intent but by play, clinging to mothers first, pressed against fur that carried the scent of bark and soil, but soon leaning down to test ground with their own toes. They would stumble, fall, roll into moss. Mothers lifted them again with practiced patience, a soft grunt given, a low nudge pressed by hand or muzzle. Then again the child would balance, wobble, straighten, shriek with delight, as if balance itself gave joy, tails snapping back and forth to steady each uncertain step. Infants clung tight across the chest in moments of danger, but as soon as caution sank, they were set down, encouraged back into the discipline of walking. A culture written not by language, but by rhythm, by repetition. The day demanded vigilance more than anything. Predators filled this world as clouds fill the sky, their absence rare, their presence constant. Wolf packs left their paw prints deep across mud after rain, long lines of stride running narrow trails. Cave lions and saber-toothed cats marked tree trunks with scratches deeper than knives. Bears stirred at the forest edge, the rumble breaking silence before vanishing again. Owls ghosted through trees to take smaller prey before even sound could warn them. Paradelopythecus met all this not with weapon or flame, but with advantage carried in patience and posture. A watcher rose in silence, back straightened, eyes stretching their reach beyond what crouched forms could see. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes the predator's hunt was broken by a sound a glimpse. A warning call that pierced across the glade and sent bodies scattering every second. Mattered every inch given. By standing created the span between blood and survival. And so posture became identity, not only a function of the body, but a symbol within the group. The one who rose first when silence struck was marked as brave. The one who stood furthest at the edge of the clearing became natural guardian. Those who failed to notice, those too slow, became marked in memory. Every stance trained the band into a collective choreography of caution. Foraging was no less shaped by the body hands freed, carried berries from bush to gathering point. Tubers dug with effort, then dragged clinging to both hands. Fish lifted alive from shallow rock pools, pressed wildly against grasping arms. It sounds ordinary to us who have always known hands could carry, but for Paradelopythecus, it was the rarest gift, the ability to transport. Nourishment meant the difference between a meal eaten quickly and food shared with young, not yet able to dig or climb. Generations survived not by abundance, but by mobility. Crossings wove into their lives as constant tests. Rivers cut across land like silver blades, shallow in one season, violent in another. And often the band needed to move across them, for the other side promised richer fruit, safer shelter, new grazing animals to follow. Males moving first would rise upright, legs plunging into the current, tails jerking for balance, arms holding against force. And when they reached the far side, others followed, mothers clutching children, juveniles shrieking their excitement and fear. They reached together, always this togetherness. And when the last straggler crossed, the group settled again, united. The danger passed. Migration taught them memory. They did not carve maps into stone, but every adult carried pathways stitched into mind as deeply as instinct. A slope marked by a lightning-struck tree, a valley where bees returned every spring, a river bend where fish gathered thick in certain moons. They remembered, and these remembered landscapes stitched Paradelopythecus into Europe, like threads woven into vast fabric. Their upright walk made these threads easier to weave, for distances stretched further, pace stretched longer, carrying food, carrying infants, searching for safety. They were wanderers of short miles each day, but long histories across lifetimes. Their wandering created permanence, not in buildings, but in migrations repeated. And yet their fate was never permanent. They remained always vulnerable, for no adaptation guarantees eternity, and already alongside their lives, the hand of chance worked patiently, shaping climate, tipping predators, shifting abundance tests, waiting in silence. But within their present, they thrived. Within their moment, they were as real and full as any of us. Imagine a dusk upon the forest, light thinned into golden washes. Across trunks, mist lifting in cool tendrils from the grass. The group gathering at shelter ridge, children pressing into parents' elders. Scanning motionless hills, one older male rising, tall knees, braced legs, holding his tail swaying with learning of decades. His eyes resting upon distances unseen by his companions. And in that moment, he stands as both guardian and mirror, both of himself and of all those after. He stands upright against time, but time flows regardless. And so the uncanny remains. This was posture never meant to last, yet posture that survived long enough to become written in bones we would someday hold. Their pelvis, their femurs, their vertebrae, unrolling for us the history of another way life could have been, not our way, but one so near that the thought chills the imagination. What if the forest had kept them longer? What if standing with a tail had not been an end, but a beginning? What if Europe had been theirs beyond memory? The stage upon which Paradelopythecus lived was not empty. It was not a silent world, where only one figure walked the forests. It was crowded, filled with voices great and small, with entire dramas that unfolded unseen by human eyes. Europe of that age was less a single landscape than a shifting geography of endless moods. Valleys heavy with mist, highlands swept with wind, coastlines where the tide reached with thunder, and meadowlands spilling into seas of grass that looked golden under sun or silver beneath moonlight. Here they shared space with many others, The world held great deer with branching antlers that rose like forests themselves, their silhouettes imposing even at distance. Elk roamed through glades to tear up roots, aurochs, ancestors of massive cattle, thundered across open stretches in numbers that shook the earth. Wild horses grazed in bands, their coats flashing under light as they ran in unison, each movement like waves across land, and among them smaller animals lived endlessly busy lives. Foxes darting between rocks, hares vanishing into burrows when hawks circled. Predators pressed themselves into this map, shaping everything in it. Lions larger than those we know crouched in grasses and stared with golden eyes into dusk. Wolves in hungry packs fanned out over fields, creating invisible nets that trapped their prey and then rushed to close them with precision. Bears taller than men rocked trees for honey or clawed at the soil for grubs. Rarely seen until up close, yet always present in the imagination of prey, saber-toothed cats prowled with silent steps. Their teeth curved long from jaws like daggers. Their muscles crouched with explosive force, and their shadows lay heavily across every waking hour of Paradelopythecus. Above, birds ruled a sky that was restless and always turning. Eagles wheeled in circles so high they appeared like specks against clouds, their sharp cries carrying across valleys and echoing from ridges in warning to all below. Owls slid between branches after nightfall, silent messengers of death. And ravens gathered to leap and cry at carcasses, announcing across miles when blood had been spilled. Each bird wound into the story of the land as tightly as root to tree, and the land itself was never still. The climate pressed with restless weight, seasons more violent than ours, winters throwing ice across forests, freezing streams solid until they rang under weight, summers turning valleys lush, but dry winds sometimes sweeping across to drag leaves to the ground in weeks. Spring burst forth sudden with endless flowers and the drone of insects. Autumn dropped abundance, then stripped it almost as swiftly, each season punishing the careless, rewarding only those who endured. Survival meant not attachment to a single rhythm, but agility to adapt when the rhythm faltered. Into this, Paradelopythecus carved its niche. Never predator, never prey alone, instead living always in the field of possibility between both. Their upright stance let them scan the broad herds as they crossed, choosing where to forage where danger was less. Their strength in numbers made lions hesitate at times. Their coordinated warnings made saber cats miss their leap. They were not armed with claws like bears, not fleet as deer, yet balanced, versatile, uncanny in their fusion of traits. Picture them in late summer, the air thick with buzzing cicadas, the meadow tall enough that grasses brushed the belly, each stalk carrying seed heads golden, and the band moved at its edge, standing taller than the grass lines, tails hovering behind, each pair of eyes scanning, while hands busied with collecting berries at the borders. They were not open field runners, but watchers, able to walk just inside the safe threshold, able to mark predators at distance before any sudden rush came. And so they claimed food where many could not linger. Winter created another map. Snow pressed flat every clearing, rivers froze, leaving glassy surfaces across their skin, and the animals that survived grew lean, Paradelopythecus tucked into hollows, curling together in warmth at night, waking only when need dragged them forth, digging through snow for bark, lifting frozen branches for insect caches, moving in short bursts, their posture slower with weight of fur ice, but still upright in vigilance, their eyes sharp against the glare of ice sun. Their niche was not comfort. Their niche was survival in between. They lived where chance allowed, but chance was harsh. They endured not because they ruled, but because they adapted without demanding mastery. And there were others whose presence was harder to define. Sometimes bones speak of primates less known, small monkeys who lingered at the edges of warmer valleys. Other creatures of tooth and claw that did not endure long enough to be named. All shared ground at times with Paradelopythecus, each echo of life overlapping briefly on the wide stage of the continent. When storms rolled in from the seas, the entire rhythm shifted. Thunder carried across ridges rolling like drums. Branches swayed under violent winds. Rain broke down in waves that left animals soaked, shivering, pressed together under rock shelters. Fish leapt as rivers swelled. Creatures drowned or thrived at random. And Paradelopythecus endured these storms as everything else did, tethered to each other. Families holding close, mothers pressing infants deep into their fur, males huddling against rock walls, but eyes still marking the wildness beyond. Even in storm, their posture rose, heads lifted to watch flashes of lightning, ears tuned for cracks of branches, tails swaying, their bodies permanent, even when earth seemed to unravel around them. The uncanniness of their presence was heightened by this theater of life around them. For to see one stand upright in such an age, with herds moving beyond, predators crouched, birds circling, snow falling or rain pouring, was to glimpse a reflection, a traveler out of place, something that had echoed what humans would one day do. But long before humans arrived, they were participants in a world that did not need them, yet still carried them. Their place within this web was fragile. They never dominated others, never forced the land, instead threading through, taking where they could, giving, little carried along by ancient rhythm their extinction. Later came not by sudden catastrophe or conflict with man, but by the same relentless weight of change that ended so many others' ecosystems. Shifted climates, reformed predators, reshuffled abundance, altered, and their balance lost footing. Still, while their story lasted, they stood upright, tail curling, scanning a vast tapestry woven of countless species. And so when we imagine them, we cannot place them alone. They are always against the backdrop of a Europe alive with contrasts. Fields of red flowers swaying under wind while massive stags crossed. Mountain passes where avalanches thundered while ibex climbed cliffs. Coasts where waves battered dark stone with salt. Skies marked by migrating birds in millions. And in all of it, Paradelopythecus walked, not as master, not as forgotten straggler yet, but as equal, as participant in the surging life of an untamed Europe. This stage was both their gift and their trial, and it is through memory of this stage, more than memory of their bones alone, that we sense them most clearly upright among the countless. Shapes of life uncanny distinct, yet part of a continuity too grand to measure. Every creature exists not only against the stage of its land, but also within the circle of its own kind. So it was with Paradelopythecus. Their survival never carried on solitary shoulders. It was held in the fabric of the group, a tapestry woven by mothers and infants, by protecting males, by restless juveniles, by the unspoken linking glances that bound them. At the center of each band, the youngest clung, tiny fingers gripping fur tightly, eyes blinking into daylight with the stunned roundness of life newly arrived. They breathed in the scent of their mothers' chests, the steady drum of heart. Just behind ribs, the endless shiver of heat passed from one body into another milk, dampening fur, their existence fragile, fully dependent on the body that carried them. Mothers guarded them fiercely, not with claws or violence, but with vigilance constantly alive. Every pause in foraging accompanied by a checking touch, every move measured with the infant held tight. And if alarm rose across the group, the young pressed instantly beneath chins, carried high, protected at all costs. Older siblings too gained role juveniles, slipping into spaces between care and freedom. They played endlessly, spinning across clearings, chasing each other among roots, pushing into upright stances to impress, tumbling down into mossy carpets of leaves, learning always by mimicry, observing every ritual of adults and rehearsing it with laughter. It was through play that posture grew most sharply, tails whipping in balance, steps stretched into half-running strides on two-legged squeals. Filling the air, their mothers indulged these rehearsals, because within them the children grew bones ready for the future. At the edge of the circle, adult males stood heavy, their shoulders higher, their vigilance heavier. Their role was not constant fight, but constant readiness when predators crept. It was their bodies that shifted first into threat postures. rising straight, arms loose and wide, tails swaying like pendulums behind, a silent signal to the band that eyes were already watching. This standing was not only against predator, it was also a message within the group. Dominance ritual made physical by who stood taller, who walked nearest the boundary, who turned shoulders toward challenge. Challenges were not constant battle, rather, a long argument of stance and posture, low growls, chest pushed forward, eyes locked, and sometimes a clash came brief, but heated pushing, grappling, biting in fury, replaced quickly by retreat and surrender. And then the group flowed back into calm, the hierarchy written once again in subtle acts. Within calmer weather, in grooming long afternoons of abundance, allowed quiet time fingers, pulling gently through fur, soothing cleaning, checking for insects, soothing gestures of family, sometimes a mother grooming one of her young, sometimes juveniles grooming each other, sometimes dominant males allowing gentle touches to maintain peace. This ritual was as vital to them as food, because togetherness was not only warmth, it was trust. And grooming created bonds deeper than alarm calls or shared vigilance could ever achieve. Survival required cooperation, and cooperation demanded quiet ties repeatedly made. Food, too, was shared in simple ways. A fruit pulled down from higher branches tossed to another waiting juvenile. A root carried some distance, placed into the circle, for others to nibble fish dropped upon stone torn apart in silence. Such acts mattered for each contribution. Strengthened unity. A band that shared endured misfortune better than splintered companions could. And when seasons were harsh, closer bonds meant greater survival. Mothers sometimes offering milk to orphans, juveniles, sometimes taken under the arms of uncles or elder siblings. Absence was felt profoundly loss, not understood perhaps, but reacted to with long-seeking gazes and restless movement when one did not return. Evenings magnified these connections, when the sun leaned, low light, bending gold through the branches. Each member of the band sought its place, children curled into mothers, juveniles close to each other, the watching males aligning in protective arcs, their shapes drawing the same circle night after night motions, ritualized into rhythm. Inside this circle, peace fell despite the forest outside. Predators could remain beyond. Owls could call above. But within, the band felt alive as one creature, breathing many lungs, watching many eyes, warming many hearts pressed together. Rains, too, brought closeness. Storms, rolling in from valleys, drove them to seek shelter in caves or under long slopes of stone. There the band, pressed tight, sharing warmth and fear, in equal measure. Children tucked so deep they vanished under fur, others grooming almost constantly as distraction. Males restless at edges, peering out at lightning strikes across meadow. And afterwards, when the storm passed, their closeness clung like memory. Every shared storm was a story written into posture and presence. One more stitch of bonding. The uncanniness of Paradelopythecus extended beyond their strange posture alone. It lived in the way their groups carried familiar echoes of our own mothers, cradling young siblings, teaching siblings, elders, standing guard hierarchy, challenged and reasserted trust, gifted by acts of grooming and food. Though they spoke no words, their lives were already social, already bent upon the fabric of community. In this lay the haunting reflection. We see not what we were, but what we might have resembled even if our story had diverged. Imagine them across a spring morning, blossoms falling from branches as wind shook crowns, petals drifting soft across hair and tail, juveniles bounding from rock to rock, arms lifted to hold balance, chasing invisible prizes, shrieking in joy. A mother pausing to rest her child upon soft leaves while grooming through fur. The infant half asleep from fullness. Males at perimeter, shoulders rising tall, scanning the field beyond. The group alive, united, pulsing gently with its own harmony. Here, harmony was as powerful a tool as muscle, as useful as teeth, for togetherness itself wrote resilience. Loss, when it came, scarred them all. A predator strike that took one left the group, restless, sometimes staying near the site, sometimes slowing for days, movements scattered, seeking the infant or juvenile. Gone, not forgotten at once, memory lingered in the way the mother's eyes stayed forward too long, and how juveniles looked constantly at the empty space. That grief, too, was part of their story, not in carved monuments, not in words or stone, but in the heavy silence of their circles. Later, when grooming resumed, it seemed gentler, longer, as if soothing touch remembered not only presence but absence. The circle was their world. Everything outside was danger and opportunity, but the circle itself was permanence, carried in bonds, posture marking place, touch stitching trust, voice giving warning. And in this social life, Paradelopythecus thrived generations long, centuries long, until time itself drew the branch close. Survival in the ancient forests was never only a matter of food or warmth. It was always a dialogue with danger. Every creature born into that age learned the language of fear, as well as it knew the language of nourishment. Paradelopythecus was no different. Its life written in the pause before crossing glade, in the silence broken by sudden calls, in the eyes that scanned the horizon more often than the ground. For predators were everywhere, not abstract in story, but present in breath. They walked the same paths, drank the same rivers, slept within the same caves when chance demanded. Lions larger than modern cousins padded across the edge of starlit plains, their steps soundless, only eyes burning low like embers behind cover. Wolves moved in packs that stretched across valleys like shadows of clouds, flankers corralling, leaders waiting for the rush. Bears, stirred by spring hunger, overturned boulders with paws that could shatter spines. And most dreadful of all, the saber-toothed cats waited in stillness, tails twitching, jaws armed with long curved knives, an ambush embodied. To live among them required constant perception, and here the upright stance of Paradelopythecus gifted it again, to see higher, to notice the ripple of grass far before claws reached, to catch the falter of birds when danger brushed beneath them, to smell the sudden bitterness of disturbed air, every sense sharpened into alarm, every adult a sentinel mother's with infants scanning juveniles, taught not by words, but by urgent rushes each time danger appeared. And yet they could not always escape. Sometimes the cats surged too suddenly. Sometimes wolves pressed in too. Tightly, sometimes storms masked approach, and the group was scattered, and in those moments, the band lost one of its own, the air filled with shrieks and growls bodies, bursting in panicked mothers, clutching children males, striking back with desperate swipes juveniles darting up trunks in terrified flight. The forest itself convulsed with movement, and then still again, silence covering absence. The cost of living in such a world was this constant tension. But it was balanced by the fullness of life the ecosystem also offered, for the prey world was ample. Herds of deer moving like tides through glades, their sheer presence feeding cats and wolves, but also shaping landscapes by grazing seeds carried in fur. Trails pressed down for use by others. Wild horses too thundered across expanses, their movements so synchronized it seemed a single vast organism, their dung enriching soil that grew fruits upon which Paradelopythecus fed. Even in predation there was giving, even in fear there was provision. Paradelopythecus learned to live within the resonance of this. They did not think of ecology, yet they embodied it, moving always with awareness of what followed what. Where prey clustered, predators must be near. Where trees bore fruit, herbivores drew also, and danger crept on their heels. So the band learned indirectly to read symphonies of others. Survival written not in self alone, but in the choreography of an entire community of beasts. Storms shifted the measure again. Clouds descending heavy, skies slit by lightning, rain slicing like cords across the canopy, rivers swollen. And swift, predators drove prey then into valleys. Prey pressed into masses, and Paradelopythecus observed from ridge or hill, waiting, watching, moving not rashly, but cautiously into edges where opportunity emerged. Down branches bearing fruit, carcasses left half-eaten by lions who were driven by flood, fish stranded in shallow pools, insects thick upon wet bark. Storms gave as well as took survival. Again, written in balance. Imagine them in high summer at River Bend. Heat clinging heavy, insects swarming, deer gathered to drink. Paradelopythecus held back not to compete, but to scan for predators their presence might attract. One male stands upright, his frame braced, tail balancing, gaze sweeping, and from across meadow suddenly comes the ripple of grass. Wolves, bodies poised low, but moving with intent. The deer bolt into flight, chaos bounding over broken ground, dust rising, alarm calls piercing, wolves launch, the chase rolling beyond, and through it all, Paradelopythecus clings to shelter, moving only when certainty returns. Opportunity left behind is safer than risk. Delay is survival. Nights curled this balance tighter, for terror sharpened with shadows. Owls glided low, talons aimed, foxes prowled for hare, lions stretched out in hunger's patience. And in these silences, Paradelopythecus huddled closer, circling tightly, their males standing sometimes with spines fully stretched, the faint moon glow casting their outline upright against sky breaks, guardians in shadow, the image uncanny even now, as though evolution rehearsed a story not yet written. And when death came within the band, grief was layered not in words, but in restless motion. Mothers calling soft for vanished children, juveniles skipping steps while traveling, elders scanning longer at spaces left open. Predator success etched into memory as absence. But still, band continuity preserved itself. Bonds tightened, vigilance heightened, the rhythm began again. No predator claim ever erased the urge to continue. The uncanniness of Paradelopythecus lies not only in posture, but in this that they lived in the same fragile drama that still carries all creatures' survival at razors. Edge fear balanced by abundance vigilance, balanced by trust death, balanced by new birth. They remind us that even without language, without mastery of fire or tool existence, was meaningful. It was communal. It was resilient in face of endless threat. And so when we imagine them, we must imagine not only the trees, not only posture, but the eyes always turned outward, listening to a world dense with predators and prey, living within a map of sounds and scents invisible, but known bodies carrying this sensory symphony into every choice. Memory teaching them pathways where danger lay heavier. Gatherings at certain springs, timed by the cycles of herd movement. Nights chosen under trees thick enough to block aerial hunters. The animal as strategist without knowing strategy. The species as survivor without knowing design. Their place ended eventually. As all places do, climate shifted again. Predators altered. Vegetation transformed. But while they lived, they stood upright against the pressure of teeth, walked upright through worlds of thundering hooves and silent hunts. Uncanny as silhouette against floodplains lit by moon. Uncanny in posture, uncanny in fate. And yet, the world was never a place of predator alone. Not a tale of endless pursuit and flight. It was also a vast web of subtle negotiations, of silences as important as screams. Those soft moments when the forest paused and Paradelopythecus could walk upright in stillness, gathering fruits beside deer who grazed too absorbed to flee, sharing the same clearing while wolves hunted somewhere farther away. A balance invisible but present. During the longest summers, when drought pressed rivers low, the animals gathered not in rivalry, but in coexistence. Wild horses pawing dust in the same valley where monkeys stripped berries. Stags lowering antlers toward grass, while Paradelopythecus mothers bent to feed infants on their knees. Each species aware, each cautious, but each shaped by the same sun and the same thirst. Such visions remind us that the ancient world was not only violence, but communion. Fleeting moments of fragile truce written in heat haze and shimmering air. Winter pressed harder stories. Snow falling deep enough to blanket paths, covering tracks, erasing scents. Predators grew restless in lean times. Wolves approached camps more boldly. Lions lingered at river margins almost skeletal in hunger. And Paradelopythecus found their circles tighter, Their range narrowed, their reliance on memory sharpened. They survived on caches of roots, on twisted shoots hidden beneath ice, on grubs found in broken wood. Every calorie held weight measured against survival of their infants. In such times, the upright stance took on new power. Guardians monitoring dusks where shapes blurred in whiteness, spotting dangers in snow glare that crouched beyond. Each night survived meant another chance for spring. Each successful warning meant the circle still breathed together. This vigilance was culture, not written in song or story, but in posture passed down from body to child to grandchild. Until extinction arrived, they endured. A community of watchers upright against the flow of time. And perhaps here lies their echo for us, that vigilance itself is kinship. That to stand tall together, even if only for heartbeats, is to carve meaning against a dangerous world. Paradelopythecus carved it long before our arrival, and left it lingering in silence. Movement was a way of life. No creature here existed without motion. To linger too long in one place meant hunger, meant danger, meant eventual death. Paradelopythecus lived this truth fully, their lives defined not by single clearings or hollows, but by roots, by remembered loops across the continent's patchwork of forest, river, and field. They were not nomads in our human sense, carrying fire or tools from camp to camp. They were wanderers tied to rhythms of sun and season, their trails unwritten, but repeated so often they might as well have been carved into the soil. Mothers remembered them in muscle. Juveniles learned them in mimicked steps. Elders marked them in posture, as they paused to watch for danger at the same bends where danger had crouched generations before. Paths grew into memory without ever touching stone. In spring, when rivers surged with meltwater, Paradelopythecus bands often followed their banks. For fish, sometimes stranded in the shallows, blossoms grew heavy with nectar, and fruit trees scattered ashore began to bloom. The bands moved slowly, then food lay easy, vigilance lessened. More time was given to children to play upright races across the meadows, to juveniles to test branches for strength, to grooming sessions woven long by warmth. Spring was indulgence. Summer tilted differently. Heat pressed heavy rivers, lowered fruits, dried insects. Bit fiercely, and they had to move further to find shaded abundance deeper into forests closer to coasts. Where breezes cooled, they walked stretches longer across miles of meadow where grasses rose to shoulders. Predators pressed hungry into those same open spaces, and so upright posture became vital once more, allowing guardians to peer far above, to spot the movement of wolves as shadows against haze. Each long heat, day became measured in patience and vigilance more than ease. Autumn brought abundance first, fruits swollen, nuts heavy in crowns, roots rich. The group sometimes lingered across repeat days at the same stands, taking what they could, filling themselves greedily. For the body knew winter waited, and then autumn betrayed, abruptly stripping trees bare, leaves falling red and orange into rivers. Herds beginning southward flights, skies filled suddenly with migrating birds. Signals shouted everywhere that winter pressed close, and so Paradelopythecus too adjusted, leaving comfort to chase survival once more. Winter was greatest trial. Snow burying trails, ice crystallizing across streams, prey thinning to ghost-like presence, predators pressing closer for desperation. Here memory was survival more than skill. The bands knew scattered places where certain roots clung deep, hollows where winds were blocked, caves where centuries had given shelter to forebears. They moved back toward these places, repeating ancient cycles not chosen freely, but chosen by time itself. Their skeletons would one day tell us nothing of these pathways, but their persistence left echoes imprinted invisibly on the land. Young grew into these cycles, not with explanation, but with repetition, following, stumbling, learning where the river turned abruptly, learning the ridge beyond which wolves liked to wait, learning which marsh filled with spring blossoms, which fall meadow hummed with bees. Their brains carved maps through steps, through endless copying of elders, through rising daily into posture. Every circle traveled carved deeper wisdom. Imagine them cresting a ridge as evening stretched low gold across valley floor. A procession of fur shapes shifting between upright strides and balanced crouches. Mothers carrying clinging infants, juveniles darting restlessly, males pausing tall against skyline to read the valley. Below them a weighted river, clusters of fruit trees, deer bands grazing easily, and just beyond, predator shadows not yet stirring, but inevitable soon. Still the band descended, for memory told of water pure there. Food over stone, a safe bed once storm broke. Life was pursued step by step, chosen not by whim, but by living memory. Migration was a cycle of families. No individual carried route alone. Knowledge was collective, repeated, and preserved by the act of simply surviving one season after another. Losing too many elders might mean broken trail. Losing too many mothers meant absence of repetition. They were not immortal, they were fragile. Yet somehow, each generation carried the maps forward, even until extinction approached, until their trails ended quietly under weight of change. To see their lives is to see a Europe written as invisible script, ridges marking chapters, rivers marking pauses, valleys anchoring lines of return, coastlines demonstrating margins, and their presence as reader within, their upright stance giving them always just enough advantage to interpret the world written around them. Uncanny figures striding a text we can never fully read now, but sensing through fragment what it once conveyed. Predators too walked those same trails, not wholly apart. Wolves followed deer, deer followed water, and where these went Paradelopythecus went also, seeking opportunity, but also danger, trails constantly crossing, competing, dancing across a continent without verdict, only interactions repeated endlessly. Sometimes survival and encounter, sometimes loss, and through it all the memory thickened, guiding later choices. What makes their way haunting is this, that migration was a kind of culture without speech. They passed their Europe to young, not with stories at fire, not with maps upon rock, but with steps and pauses, with sudden warnings at certain places and calm on others. Wisdom written in the twitch of tail tilt of spine, lifting of head, and in that silence was built one of the most complex inheritances possible. Knowledge of a land survived through centuries, by nothing more enduring than behavior itself. Picture them in snow fog, slow lines of travel, each figure upright against blank horizon, pauses constant, breaks for food rare, pathways hidden under months of white. Yet still they tread faithfully, mothers marking steps by recollection of her own mother's travels. Juveniles resentful of cold, but repeating still, learning hunger as instruction, learning fatigue as lesson, learning survival as heritage. When spring one day broke again, such wisdom meant the continuation of life's thread. Migration did not only shape where they lived, it shaped what they became. Bodies built to stride upright, across longer distances patience, woven into instinct, because nothing was found instantly. Vigilance woven into character, because everything could hold ambush. They were more than simply monkeys upright. They were travelers upright, uncanny. Because posture was not accident, it was forged in countless journeys mandated by the turning seasons. And yet, their fate was to disappear. Their cycles one day broken, when climate ended their balance. Predators shifted again, forests altered growth. Roots no longer gave what they once gave. Extinction came not in single blow, but gradually. Scattered bands reduced across time until only fragments lingered, their roots forgotten, their maps erased. Yet for the centuries they thrived. They walked trails invisible yet powerful. They carried culture not into cities, but into memory. And there they remain hauntingly alive for us. Paradelopythecus reminds us now that to stand, to move across the land with head raised, to memorize earth through repetition rather than writing, is itself a form of story. And in their story, we see how much of life is shaped not by distant destiny, but by simple pattern. Footsteps retraced, vigilance renewed, circles lived until history closes the page. And yet, perhaps the most haunting truth of their movement is how it lingers even without lasting marks. Paradelopythecus did not etch roads in stone. They did not stack cairns along riverbanks, did not trace ochre across cavern walls to guide those yet to come. And still, they carried trails inside them, embodied maps born of repetition and memory, pressed not in pages, but in posture, in slow rehearsals repeated until instinct took over. The elders shaped these invisible cartographies most clearly. They had survived long enough to feel the rhythms of a dozen winters, to see storms carve rivers new, to endure when meadows grew barren and bloom again. Such survival meant recognition. Their steps slower, their pauses longer, but every pause was instruction, a signal to the young, who stopped when they saw stopping, who ran when they saw running, who lifted heads when they saw guardian gaze trained upon distance. In this way, the land became textbook, the earth itself the only story they needed read, each ridge a lesson, each glade a reminder, each watercourse a promise or warning. Juveniles, too, rewrote these lessons in the language of play. They would follow well-worn paths, but bound sidelong to test new ground. They chased each other across slopes, leapt into rivers just to feel the sway of water, tumbled down banks until mothers growled mild warning. And all the while, the band's movements knitted their arcs back into the trusted route. Play was not mere chaos. It was exploration safely tethered to familiarity. It was experimentation within the embrace of heritage. By these games, unseen knowledge grew like bones, until what seemed like noisy struggle was in truth the shaping of future vigilance. In dusk hours, their passage was almost spectral. Imagine a procession across half-frozen meadow, the light thinned into blue shadow and frost rising gentle mist. The figures shifting in stillness, each standing upright briefly, tails glowing faint curves, their steps pressing into soil soft enough to hold imprints that dawn would erase. Yet in that moment, the land accepted them fully. They were not trespassers, but participants, their presence as rightful as the deer, as enduring as the wolf. Though those steps now are vanished, lost beneath eons, there is strange power in knowing they were here, utterly real, utterly alive. Their migration's ghost lines that still haunt the imagination. And so Paradelopythecus leaves its most uncanny legacy, not in fossil fragments alone, but in the unseeable record of movement footsteps across Europe's forgotten valleys, footsteps across ridges and coasts, footsteps carried generation to generation, without word or sign, until their extinction silenced the rhythm. And only in fragments of bone would we one day trace them. They remind us that the deepest heritage is not always written. Sometimes it is walked, repeated silently until bodies carry maps long after voices fail. And in that inheritance of motion, Paradelopythecus remains alive, forever walking somewhere inside the memory of the land. The forest never held a single voice, never moved to the rhythm of one creature alone. It was a chorus, a weaving of countless strands that breathed together. And Paradelopythecus survived only by listening to that chorus with a patience deeper than thought. Birds were often the first signals. Their wings not only filled the sky with motion, but also marked danger below. Each band of monkeys learned to read them. When sparrows burst suddenly from the grass, something unseen moved within it. When crows circled endlessly and cried, death already crouched somewhere near. Ravens taught subtler lessons, for they would follow wolves and cats, their black shapes wheeling above hunts, their hoarse calls warning prey, far before predator arrived. Paradelopythecus did not understand these birds as companions, yet their survival often depended on heeding those messages, raising their own alarm when wings told them danger pressed near, falling silent when owls ghosted overhead, for silence itself told of aerial threat. Insects, too, acted as unintentional guides. The drone of bees filled meadows in high summer, swarming low near hollow trees heavy with honeycomb. Paradelopythecus bands learned to sniff air marked sweet, to approach carefully and taste the edges, to leave quickly before stings pressed too heavy. Dragonflies darting low over pools marked water still and drinkable. Locust swarms sometimes predicted changes of season or weather, and in their restless shifting, The monkeys adjusted too. Even what seemed smallest became compass. A finger brush through crawling lines of ants could point to fruit fallen nearby. For such trails led not only to labor, but nourishment if one knew to follow. Large herbivores were more blatant. Deer that grazed calmly meant predators absent for now. Deer that froze meant shadows crouched. Wild horses running across open meadow meant wolves were at hunt. Bison bands stamping near banks meant threats slid along edges of forest. Paradelopythecus watched endlessly, not needing speech to interpret, for their very lives hung upon such interpretations. And with each generation they improved, refining vigilance into survival heritage. And predators themselves created maps of presence, not companions, never, but anticipated enough to become part of the dialogue too. Wolves howled far off, and the monkeys shifted course. Lions roared at dusk, and they pulled close. Saber cats left claw marks on bark, and bands lingered in caves for a while. Bears overturned soil where grubs had lived, and cautious hands sometimes followed to pluck remains predator destruction. Made resources predator hunger, made avoidance predator movement. Gave both directions for fear and small opportunities for living. None of this was conscious strategy, but an embodied dance learned through repetition. Absorbed by young who followed elders, remembered by mothers who had lost before, passed through action alone. The uncanny gift of standing upright deepened this listening, for when Paradelopythecus rose from 4 to 2, their perspective widened well beyond sound. Eyes could scan bird flight against sky, watch herds for disturbed motion, note predators long before they crouched near. Posture became amplification, a chance to read the orchestra with clarity, and in those elevated glances lay the thin thread that held them safe. Imagine them crossing a mixed glade one morning, dew sparkling heavy as light seeped between leaves. A herd of deer bent low to graze, tails flicking lazily. Paradelopythecus males pause upright at tree line, reading posture of the deer, no stiffness, no frozen ears, no sudden twitch. And so they relax into gathering roots, trusting deer vigilance as much as their own. And then a crow begins circling above nearer slope, calling deeply. Deer heads rise abruptly. Silence falls across glade, and instantly the band reacts, shrieks, rushing back into cover. Wolves slid across the grass. Seconds later, too late to surprise. Here survival lay not in strength, but in attention. Not in mastery, but in listening well to others. Autumn amplified this still further. For migrations poured across lands, geese in low flocks passing with thunderous wings, their cries marking shifts of season. Fish pushing upriver in silver bursts, bears pressing to banks to seize them, stags battling antlers in echoing fields. Paradelopythecus stood as witnesses to all this, adjusting their patterns quietly, slipping into openings created by larger dramas, retreating when fights roared too close, advancing after herds moved on, leaving ground torn and edible. They were minor players, perhaps, yet utterly part of the whole script. Winter tightened the circle, and here signals mattered even more. The absence of birds pointed to approaching storms. The scarceness of insect hum told of frost waiting by twilight. The heavy stillness of deer herds pressed together in glens marked predators circling nearby. Paradelopythecus learned to pause even longer then. Upright figures in snow fog, reading everything not by word, but by atmosphere. One sigh of air, different, became a cause to wait. One silence among the canopy became cause to search sky. Every detail mattered, and those who could read the orchestra lived to carry its rhythm. To imagine them now is to imagine not only strange figures upright with tails swaying, but strange listeners, tuned to symphony we can barely fathom. They remind us that life was never solitary, even in its harshest, that every species wrote message into air, into water, into soil. And that survival was simply listening, simply heeding, simply weaving one's breath into larger breath. Fossil bones speak to us of hips and spines, of posture and stance. But what they cannot tell us directly is how deeply survival meant entanglement. Paradelopythecus endure in imagination most clearly when we realize they were not just uncanny in form, but uncanny in place, part of Europe's orchestra, even if only for a limited song. And when extinction finally came, it was not only Paradelopythecus that ended, it was also the disappearance of this one listening presence. This one set of observers tuned so uniquely to the voices around them, the orchestra, simply continued shifting toward the arrival of other species, other players. But part of the chorus was silenced, and only the memory of their strange posture remains to us now. Haunting reminder that Europe once held listeners walking taller than its bush, taller yet unknowable. And still, perhaps the most uncanny echo of their place comes not from what they consumed or avoided, but from what they observed. Paradelopythecus lived not as predator nor as lord, but as witness, and in witnessing they endured. Their upright frames often placed them above the grasses as silent watchers. Their eyes not only focused on predators, but often upon the theater of life itself. A storm rolling in across a herd of wild horses could hold them long still, the crash of hooves rippling like thunder across meadow, dust rising into heat, muscles shimmering with sweat as predators slunk away to wait another moment. The band of monkeys crouched, upright, breathing hard as pulse and pounding combined into a myth the forest itself seemed to tell. Days later, they would still cluster around the same clearing, sniffing the ground strewn with hoof marks, touching broken twigs, as though revisiting the story replayed upon the land. They learned not only to heed deer freezes or crow calls, but to follow opportunities sparked by others. If wolves abandoned half-eaten kill, Paradelopythecus would creep wary but patient, stripping marrow, licking what little nutrition remained, sometimes even trailing scavenging ravens who themselves trailed lions. What was fierce drama above became survival scraps below. Yet these scraps meant another day survived, another infant nourished, another elder carried forward. Coexistence was rarely harmony, but it was rhythm nonetheless, and in rhythm there is steadiness. What strikes us when imagining them is this unending patience, never rushing blindly, never claiming dominance, forever keyed to the songs of others. They remind us that survival does not always roar like a lion. Sometimes it whispers, bending ear to wind, eye to horizon, nose to dust, posture to vigilance. A way of being that refuses excess and clings instead to awareness. This, perhaps, was their greatest gift. They taught the land that another shape too could listen. Another figure too could participate in the ancient choir. They remind us the orchestra once had one more musician who has since fallen quiet. And though we cannot hear their notes directly anymore, the silence they left behind is as powerful as the songs that remain. Time is a river, and sometimes its flow is so slow that only the stones themselves seem to notice. Paradelopythecus lived within such a current. Their days seemed ordinary, a gathering here, a predator there, a storm rolling over the ridges. Yet when we step back to see the scale, we find that these same rhythms stretched across centuries, repeated so consistently, it was as if the earth pressed play on the same song again and again. A mother clutched her infant tightly as dawn light broke across a meadow. 30 years later, another mother, her descendant, did the same in that same meadow. 60 years later again, another infant once more clung to fur that smelled of forest damp. Again and again, the scene replayed, not because they remembered, but because their bodies demanded it. Life circulating in patterns stronger than thought, cycles that outlived individuals and sculpted an entire species. Europe itself was shifting across these millennia. Glaciers grew fat and heavy, and slowly thinned. Rivers carved deeper canyons, valleys filled and drained. Forests advanced and retreated like armies in silence. Herds of deer altered migration routes. Predators expanded, then vanished. Yet within all this turmoil, Paradelopythecus kept walking, upright, tail swaying, eyes lifted, as if nothing around them could rewrite their way of being. The uncanniness is not simply their form, but their persistence. For long ages, they endured without spectacle. They did not conquer lands or alter ecologies. They simply fitted themselves into the turning page, marking each season with survival. Generations layered upon each other like fallen leaves, one fading into the soil, the next growing upon it. Juveniles who once clutched mothers grew to stand as sentinels, raising the alarm when shadows approached, their own offspring learning in mimicry. And then they too fell silent, the pattern unbroken. Perhaps for tens of thousands of years this continuity held entire epochs of time in which little changed, and yet this lack of change was itself extraordinary to live stable across the pulse of shifting climates, to surrender to the rhythm rather than fight it. At night, stars stretched above them, the same constellations that we see today, Orion tightening his belt against winter, the Pleiades rising glimmering in clusters, the Milky Way spilling soft light across the canopy. Paradelopythecus would never name them, but they lived beneath them, entire generations born and buried under the same glimmers, the same arrangements that watched over our infancy too, the sky a silent continuity above, watching this parallel child of evolution stride across Earth. Think of 10,000 winters passing in sequence, entire snows, rising and falling rivers, freezing and thawing trees, losing leaves and regaining them, storms drifting predators, hunting prey birthing, and amidst every one of those winters, bands of Paradelopythecus pressed close for warmth, children clinging, guardians upright, the scene identical, as though photographed again and again across time. If a traveler somehow watched from the first dawn of their species to near their end, that traveler would see almost nothing change. Only the rise and fall of numbers, the thinning of herds, the widening of hunger with harsher climates. Everything else simply repeated and still. Within that sameness lay richness, grooming bonds deepening every year, elders surviving longer than expected, juveniles crafting play that made them fit for vigilance, mothers soothing infants who screamed in fear at every shadow, males facing each other in ritual postures for hierarchy, the same acts across ages. For though they never stored memory in tools or fire, they stored memory in the body, the legacy of behavior. Theirs was not progress, but endurance. And endurance can be more astonishing, for nature rarely rewards the brilliant spark that burns briefly, but rewards those who persist quietly across epochs. The stripe of time running across their span eventually carried them to decline, yet for most of their existence, decline did not trouble them. They existed balanced, unremarkable to their own age, remarkable only now in hindsight, because we, who crave stories of advancement, must pause to honor stories of patience, of repetition, of stability. Paradelopythecus tells that story. A species whose uncanniness is not just their upright stance, but their gentle persistence across an age that devoured so many others. Imagine once more their quiet presence along glacial river, mist rising from ice water at dawn, their silhouettes upright yet foreign to us, repeating the same trek their ancestors repeated centuries prior, the same trek their descendants would repeat after. Nothing changed in outward sight, and yet the mirror of their existence reflected in Europe's memory forever. Time did not hurry them. It carried them forward in the long, unbroken stream that bends mountains and swallows. Rivers the seasons pressed endlessly, winter, spring, summer, autumn, one after another, like steady footfalls upon soil, and Paradelopythecus walked quietly within this stream, making no monuments to tell the ages apart. Every infant born as if for the first time, every elder dying as if for the first time, even though countless before had done the same. Generations layered themselves gently, just as trees lay ring upon ring in hidden wood. From one point of view, their lives seemed repetitive, yet repetition was the very engine that carried them further. It was not progress that sustained them, but constancy. The refusal to break the circle, to remain locked to the rhythms of land. This surrender to rhythm was itself wisdom. Consider the image of a glade in Europe 100 centuries before their end. Now imagine the same glade 500 centuries before their birth. Between those spans of uncountable winters and warmings, The forest itself transformed rivers, moved predators, rose and fell, yet the monkeys that walked upright persisted through it all, rising every dawn to forage, lifting heads to scan sleeping in hidden hollows at dusk, bodies carrying echoes of posture forward, like prayer beads said without break. Such continuity is almost beyond human comprehension, for we mark change as essence of story. They marked survival as essence of existence. If one could stand outside time and watch them, it would be like listening to a single song played endlessly on loop. And only very slowly, almost imperceptibly, would the tune grow thinner, until silence pressed in where once the endless chorus of bodies had filled the stage. Their extinction came gently by centuries, not by cataclysm, just as fires burn low without fuel, just as rivers dry after centuries of slow loss. When last they vanished, the earth scarcely noticed, though the silence remained. And now, long after, that silence is what touches us most. Paradelopythecus teaches us a truth we do not always wish to hear, that not all survival is measured by triumph. Not all stories rise toward spectacle. Sometimes endurance across deep time is itself greatness. Sometimes living quietly against the storm for thousands of faded years is legacy enough. And sometimes extinction comes not with roar, but with the quiet exhale of a species that has simply finished its circle. Decline does not always arrive like storm or fire. More often it comes like the slow drip of water hollowing stone. Quiet, patient, invisibly relentless. That was how the age of Paradelopythecus began to thin. Not in one-season calamity, but in centuries of small diminishment. Europe itself was never still. Glaciers pressed outward across mountains, then receded without apology. Rivers shifted courses, carving valleys where before there had been none. Forests shrank and surged, alternating between openness and canopy. Animals rose and vanished in the shifting. Those that endured bent their patterns more quickly, adapted more swiftly, while those slower were pressed thinner, their maps broken, their cycles thrown into uncertainty. Paradelopythecus had endured for millennia by leaning into constancy. But constancy itself sometimes becomes a weakness. What once had been a strength, their niche of patience, their culture of repetition, began to betray them as the climates grew sharper. Food sources thinning in places that for generations had been trusted. Predator webs rebalancing. New competitors stepping onto the stage. The first centuries of decline were likely invisible to them. Still the mothers carried infants. Still the juveniles played in meadows. Still the males rose upright in vigilance. The rhythms looked unchanged to the eye. But under that surface, the fabric frayed. Herds pressed in new directions. Storms lingered longer. Winters grew cooler. And slowly the numbers of Paradelopythecus dimmed. One band gone here after a century. Another failing in a storm-lashed valley. Not all at once, never all at once, just absence growing like shadow. Small fragments of the species lingered, scattered in pockets, clinging to last refuges where food still gathered, in hidden valleys where predators seldom prowled, narrow strips of coastline where fruiting shrubs survived the harsher swings. But such refuges were fragile. The moment the balance shifted, extinction flared within them, quietly erasing yet another path. And still, for those individuals alive in that time, reality must not have felt like extinction. It must have felt simply like life, hunger sharpened longer, journeys stretched further, losses grew heavier, but infants were still born and clung to mothers. Juveniles still raced and toppled. Warnings were still cried at movement in grass. The last Paradelopythecus likely died without ceremony, just another body folding into soil bones left for worms their species. Gone without monument, their voice withdrawn without echo. Yet the earth itself had carried them for ages, and though it dropped them, gently their presence cannot be erased altogether. What touches us most about their decline is not its violence, but its silence, the way a pattern repeated across thousands of years, gradually unraveled the way steps pressed into soil across 20 centuries, ended as if erased the way vigilance once taught became useless because no descendant came to need the lesson further. It is the tragedy of lost continuity, not sudden tragedy. Still, the fossils whisper, hips grown for upright stance, femurs angled, vertebra curved, tails balanced, the remains preserved under soil like pressed leaves, and through them we catch not only a fragment of body, but of presence, that uncanny posture, that mirror of what we became now shown to us as path diverged. And so the story of Paradelopythecus closes not with fire but with fade, not with explosion but with slow dimming. A reminder that extinction is most often not drama, but silence, a thinning of song until the orchestra continues without one of its musicians. Their uncanniness lingers in how near they came to echoing our form, and how entirely they vanished regardless. A paradox both haunting and sobering. Europe moved on into ages of other faces, until humans themselves arrived, crossing valleys that once rang with footsteps upright yet tailed. Never knowing companions had walked there before. Only centuries later, in the hands of scientists brushing dust from bones, did silence break, and the forgotten species returned in imagination. Decline lingers longer than presence, for silence carries echo further than sound. When Paradelopythecus began to thin from the stage, the forest did not immediately notice. Deer still grazed, wolves still prowled, lions still slept in shadows. Only slowly, like a song falling fainter with each refrain, did their absence spread. At first, perhaps it was only one less call at dusk, one less set of footprints pressed into mud after rain, one less figure rising at the edge of meadow to scan horizon. The band still gathered, but the circle a little smaller, still warm, but thinner, each generation fewer than before. Yet the rhythm continued, carried stubbornly forward by those remaining, as if the earth itself willed the song to last despite its fading. For centuries, this half-existence endured, small scattered outposts of their kind, holding across valleys, coastal slopes, forest ridges, pockets of persistence, clinging to memory and steps. Across familiar trails, elders, teaching vigilance as ever, infants clinging as ever, juveniles competing and laughing as ever their lives. No less real for being outnumbered, no less full for being closer to their end. But nature operates in scales wider than will. Climates redrew maps without caring who walked them. Prey shifted patterns. Forests grew harsher. Competitors with quicker breeding or wider diets gained advantage. Predators adjusted and pressed harder into refuges once safe. Inch by inch the balance broke, and the uncanny walkers slipped into disadvantage they could not reverse. The final centuries of Paradelopythecus were likely unremarkable to them. Still they gathered, still they played, still they sought food under sunlight. They did not know their kind was vanishing. Extinction is never felt inside the circle, only by those who look back afterwards. For each infant clung without thought of finality, each elder transformed into soil, just as countless elders had before. To those alive, no abyss yawned, only life as always. And when at last the last band fell silent, perhaps by sickness, perhaps by storm, perhaps by simple lack, no trumpet announced, no sky dimmed, no beast paused, silence folded over absence gently, covering them as if they had never been. Yet bones and soil tell a truer story. They were, they stood, they walked, they endured, and now from distance of 50 centuries multiplied many times, we remember them not as tragedy but as lesson. Paradelopythecus teaches how fragile even long persistence can be, how millennia of stability can still end without remark, how life is not owed permanence, how silence is inevitable. Their uncanniness remains, not only in posture, but in fate, to resemble what would come, yet to vanish before it arrived. The land forgets quickly, yet it also remembers in ways hidden from sight. When humans at last moved into Europe carrying fire and stone laughter and story, they stepped across ground already, marked unknowingly into a theater that had once held another upright player. Paradelopythecus had vanished centuries before, leaving only faint whisper in soil, yet their memory lingered in silence. Forests still stretched in green abundance, rivers cut familiar veins across slopes, plains still echoed with hoof thunder, predators still crouched in shadow, for the land itself did not pause in mourning, and humans found stage already set. Only actors shifted, they knelt to drink in streams, their reflection flashing back eyes above jaw, unaware that once another reflection had stared from similar pools with muzzle longer, eyes wide, tail swaying behind. Our arrival was triumphant in ways, stone edges sharper, fire under command, speech heavy with symbols, memory carried not only in repetition but in story, technology and imagination blending, yet beneath every stride lay echoes of something gone. We walked upright, but not first. We raised young at center of bands, but not first. We scanned horizon for danger, but not first. Paradelopythecus had rehearsed some of these gestures ages before. Their extinction cleared stage that we later claimed, though we arrived never knowing companions had preceded us. Fossils tell us truth only in hindsight, their bones unearthed by hands of scientists. But to the humans entering these valleys then, the world seemed new, unshaped by kin before, yet unknowingly we carried echoes of what the land had already seen. Rivers that once fed tail-bearing walkers now reflected fires of human camps. Caves that had sheltered bands of guardians now held ochre outlines of human hands. Meadows where Paradelopythecus had carried infants upright through danger now saw humans carve spears and paint huts in smoke glow. The land accepted the exchange without question, patient. It will embrace any who live upon it. But in quiet ways, it may still have whispered memory wolves, haunting same trails, used to stalk both species birds, circling over herds that both had watched. Scars on trunks, scratched by predators familiar to both continuity. Lived in non-human presences, only the players within them had shifted. This absence matters more than we think, for history often tells us we were first to stand, first to claim upright stance, but fossils remind otherwise. Europe once carried them before us, uncanny kin who never became us, yet who shaped Earth by presence long before our ancestors claimed it. To feel this is sobering. Our uniqueness thins, our dominance not absolute. The land waits, allows, carries species forward, then removes them, even us perhaps one day, for we too are temporary, as they once were. Imagine early humans stepping carefully into glade, glimmering with morning mist, deer grazing calmly, predator shadows hovering in silence, and behind them, the invisible footprints of bands long gone. Paradelopythecus once had risen here, eyes lifted, tails swaying, guardians at edge, circles pressed close, their absence unseen but complete. And yet, in invisible ways, the memory lingered, not in mind, but in essence. We built cultures, fires, cities eventually, but step by step, still we repeated lessons rehearsed by others. Vigilance at night circle, upright stance scanning horizon, tenderness to infants kept closest, ritual of grooming, shifted later into ritual of story, the continuity uncanny. And perhaps this is why their story touches us now, because it reminds us that we never walked alone into silence. Even before our time, paths were worn, other feet pressed before ours. They belong to prehistory, yet they haunt history not with voice, but with posture, with the visual shock of skeletons that look nearly us, but sway, different echoing alternate narrative of what intelligence might have been if chance played other hand. Their bones discovered later became our inheritance in imagination, showing that Europe was homeland not only to us, but to mystery species we almost forgot. Their memory changes how we view ourselves. We are not the only upright walkers in the book of the world, nor would we be the last if chance spins differently again. Posture is not destiny, Endurance is not guaranteed. Story is never single thread, but many, many burned away. And so when firelight quivered across human faces in caves of Spain and France, making art to outlast moment, we did so unknowingly beneath ceilings that perhaps once sheltered other kinds. Their shadows vanished, but their echo remained in silence. And perhaps the most haunting truth is this, that humans entered a Europe already haunted by silence. We believed ourselves pioneers, yet the ground beneath our feet told another story. Every ridge we crossed had been crossed before. Every meadow we hunted had held upright watchers long gone. We thought ourselves first. But the land does not measure in beginnings. It measures only in continuities. The early humans who struck sparks upon flint, who painted antelope on stone walls, never knew that such echoes already existed under the soil hidden in bones. They looked upon the deer and the lions as if for the first time. They learned vigilance as though born anew, yet the same patterns had been rehearsed in flesh long before them. Flesh that had failed not for lack of courage, but for lack of chance. This mirror unsettles. It tells us that our ways are not as unique as we imagine, that we stand upon echoes, that upright posture was not gifted only to us, but written twice, and only one story endured. The Paradelopythecus did not leave monuments, no carved faces of gods, no towering stone aligned to stars. And yet, in their way, they left monument deeper. An alternate path carved and lost. A reminder pressed into earth itself that life repeats experiments, that what we prize in ourselves may simply be another accident time favors for a season. In the curve of their hips, we see the shadow of our walk. In the shape of their bands, we see shadow of our families. In their circles of vigilance, we see shadow of our tribes in their silence. We see the shadow of our future too. For nothing promised their end would not one day come to us. So when humans came fully into Europe with fire, with tools, with growing story, woven between mouths, we carried not only our arrival, but also the inheritance of absence. The empty space once filled by uncanny kin became the opening in which we grew. Our story stands upon their silence. Every footprint of humanity, every flicker of torchlight in the caves, every carving in ivory, is accompanied invisibly by the memory of footsteps. No longer printed torchlight, no longer lit carvings. Never made, but still imagined disappearance, as much a foundation as survival. The lesson is not despair, but humility. To realize we were not first, but only next. To realize upright stance was not singular, but shared. To realize we too are temporary participants, and that our permanence lies not in forever enduring, but in being remembered when the silence comes, as Paradelopythecus has been remembered now. The line between what is other and what is kin has always been soft drawn more by story than by bone when we think of Paradelopythecus. It is easy to imagine them only as strange monkeys, upright, yet tailed familiar, yet alien, but if we lean long enough into their living circle, the reflection grows stronger, for so many patterns we think are ours alone had been rehearsed softly by them long before we came. At their core was the circle, no different than the rings we still make around fire. Every dusk they pulled close, infants tucked in warmth, mothers heavy with care, juveniles pressed together, males leaning outward into watchful perimeter. This rhythm is so familiar, we almost miss its strangeness. Primates long separated by time and fate, bound to repeat the same gesture of safety, closeness as shield. Our ancestors would gather around flame, Paradelopythecus pressed together in fur and dark, yet the shape looked the same. One ring against night, one circle against predator world. Bodies aligned for trust, breathing in unison. Silence punctuated by the watchful gaze, by the sudden snap to attention at unnoticed sound. All of survival pressed into choreography. They groomed where we talk, fingers tracing fur, searching for parasites, giving comfort, stitching unity thread by thread. We replaced that with story, voices weaving invisible strands between us, carrying memory, laughing, mourning, blessing, warning. But both served the same need, to hold the circle tight, to keep together what could not survive alone. Our words are their fingers. Their fingers were our words 500,000 years before we spoke. They played as our children play, stripping seriousness from moment, racing across slope for no food won, chasing each other's tails as if rehearsal for nothing. Yet in play came learning. Muscles strengthened, vigilance sharpened, balance tested, trust between young forged, as in us, laughter carried lessons more deeply than command. They lived by hierarchy as we did, not by crown or throne, but by posture. The tallest stand, the boldest rise, shoulders squared, tail swaying rigid, dominance claimed with silence as often as violence. Our thrones are carved, but they too rose above to show presence. Both species bound by the awareness that group needs boundary. Group needs figure at edge, whether chosen by ritual or won by stance. Even grief was mirrored, for when they lost one of their band, the silence lingered. Searching glances, restless pauses, mothers carrying hollows in arms, young glancing again and again toward empty space. This sadness resembles our own. Though unspoken, it pressed heavy across groups, holding impact longer than logic could explain. Death carved absence regardless of word, regardless of stone marker. Their mourning was felt through motion. Our mourning later felt through song, but the ache is the same beneath. In these parallels lies uncanniness deeper than bone, deeper than posture. It is not only that they walked upright, but that their lives walked alongside ours in ritual shape. We tell ourselves we are unique in community, but they had community. We tell ourselves unique in vigilance, but they had centuries. We tell ourselves unique in play, passing lessons, but they taught in laughter. We tell ourselves unique in mourning, but they mourn too. What divides us and them is not structure of life, but detail of tool, detail of symbol, detail of continuity preserved beyond bone. Their way dissolved, ours endured. Yet for long ages, the patterns were shared more than separated. Picture again the dusk of their circle. Off in another valley, a band of early humans pressing close around spark of fire. One group groomed, one group talked. What truly was the difference then? Both circles resisting night, both circles repeating gestures older than language, both circles containing trust, both weaving bonds in their way. What divides them from us collapses when seen through rhythm, and rhythm is as deep as heartbeat itself. This is where humility lies, for Paradelopythecus reminds us that humanity is not invention of ex nihilo, but variation upon theme. The stage of life had been rehearsed many times with different actors. We happen only to be the latest to claim spotlight. The uncanniness runs not in posture alone, but in the thought that we are not alone. We are never truly unique. We are simply continuation of pattern. Fossils whisper this lesson too, as scientists turn fragments in light, hips sculpted for stance, vertebrae aligned upright, tails carried long despite. They realize bones themselves echo human form. But life within those bones echoed human habits as well. History does not reveal us as singular, but as latest, not only as masters, but as inheritors. In this uncanniness lies humility sharper than any spear point. Our lives may one day be mirrored too by future species, and perhaps we too shall vanish, leaving only fragments for them to turn in puzzled hands. For thousands upon thousands of years, silence kept them hidden. Paradelopythecus lay beneath layers of earth and stone, their bones pressed flat by weight of soil, their teeth darkened by time, their memories scattered into fragments unnoticed in the folds of riverbanks and cliffs, their story erased from living world, only present in whispers of absence, until in one moment of human curiosity, more than 19 centuries after their vanishing, silence split. The year was 1903, and hands turning spades of soil pulled free what seemed at first ordinary stone. But closer gazes revealed shape unfamiliar, jaw curved, tooth broad, fragments too precisely structured to be lifeless. And in time the pieces told their tale. Here was creature neither ape nor human, not baboon, not dog, but something in between, tail long yet stance upright, muzzle forward yet posture uncanny. From that shovelful of soil came echo across ages. Existence rediscovered, their extinction undone in memory, if not in flesh. Science moves slowly, assembling fragments like puzzle with half its pieces missing. Teeth analyzed, pelvis studied, comparisons drawn against known apes, known monkeys, known humans, and each detail unsettled the boundary. Hips weighted differently, vertebrae stacked for upright balance, bones neither here nor there. Haunting riddle pressed into fossil. And the name given, Paradelopythecus, near monkey. Beside monkey, a title that captured both kinship and strangeness, a name not of life but of classification. Yet through it, the species lived again in words. Like spark igniting darkness, they rose into thought. As decades passed, other fragments joined chorus. Bones found in scattered valleys, sediments giving up their secrets reluctantly. Scientists brushing carefully with small tools in caves, each fragment still just stone. And yet each fragment whispering into our ears across millions of years, helping us assemble a picture of bodies long gone, walkers upright with tails still swaying. And in these reconstructions, we found ourselves unsettled, for it was not the strangeness that struck hardest, but the familiarity hips. Recalling our walk eye sockets, hinting at forward gaze like ours groups, imagined moving in circles like our family's fossils, became mirrors held. Against us not exact, but askew showing what else could have been. What fossils teach most is humility, that memory of life can survive beyond life itself, pressed into rock, hidden in strata, waiting patient until hands return it to air. Paradelopythecus lived again, not in flesh, but in imagination, summoned not by their own will, but by our curiosity, our endless digging into deep time. And this imagination is powerful, for it rebuilds moments lost forever. Paintings drawn in mind of their bands scanning horizon, their juveniles chasing in meadows, their mothers grooming in shelter. Bones provide the outline, patience provides the light. Together they ignite ghosts into half-breath again. When early humans crossed into Europe, they did not know companions had walked here before them. But in 1903 and years after, we knew. Silence finally broke. And with fossil evidence came haunting recognition. We are not alone even in memory. Our lineage is not only ours, but an overlapping manuscript written many times on the same earth. Paradelopythecus was one draft erased, but legible still, reminding us that identity is fragile, that tomorrow's fossils may confuse future species the way theirs confuse us now. Imagine scientists kneeling low in valley, brushing away sediment with care, dust filling air, light catching curve of bone, patient glances piecing together jaw older than any city, femur older than any kingdom, pelvis that once carried living child across meadow, now cold and silent forever. Yet in that stillness, story sparked. Our voices rising where theirs had fallen. The bones gave them second life, not as warm-blooded creatures, but as symbols, as teachers gesturing to us about fragility of survival, reminding that silence is not absolute, that memory sometimes sleeps only until spade touches soil. And through this, the uncanny monkey walks again, not in forest, but in our minds, posture haunting, tail swaying, echoing silently, as if drawn across dreams. Their absence turned presence by fragments of stone. Discovery is one moment, understanding is another. For when Paradelopythecus rose again into memory in 1903, their jaw and fragments of limb held no instant answer, only riddle. And paleontology at that time was still young, still finding its confidence. Bones were read through lenses of expectation, compared endlessly with apes, monkeys, humans, categories stretched and bent. And through it all the uncanny monkey sat awkwardly, refusing to fit. Some saw in the pelvis and femur the pull of something human-like, a body used to walking upright. Yet the long tail spoke back. Sharp muzzle argued against kinship. Their name itself was compromise. Beside monkey, something near but not quite, a shadow between categories. And debates rose. Was this a form on way toward human gait? Or an experiment ended too soon? Was its walk upright by design, or by necessity? Did its spine whisper of kinship, or only echo of chance? Fleets of scientists laced their papers with conflicting claims, each new fragment more unsettling than clarifying. But here lies beauty. Uncertainty itself is story. Fossils do not give clarity at once. They invite imagination. They demand patience, waiting for fragments to speak together. So early scientists filled gaps with artistry, sketching reconstructions, drawings of creatures upright with tail curled behind, creatures midway between baboon and primitive man. And though these sketches erred in detail, they offered life to bones, raising them from museum cases into presence again. The uncanny nature of Paradelopythecus lay not only in its real anatomy, but in how it forced imagination open. Science and wonder entwined, each fragment an ember, scientists blowing gently hoping fire might rise. Over decades, paleontology advanced. Soils dated more carefully. Comparisons broadened. Anatomy traced with more precision. Theories trimmed nearer truth. But through all refinement, the core remained. Here was evidence that upright stance was not humanity's alone, that nature rehearses. Repeats experiments that survival could have taken other roads, that chance, not inevitability, delivered us. And that truth is humbling, unsettling, profound. Museums became new caves where these bones rested. Glass cases their shelter, hushed visitors their predators of gaze. Labels naming them in Latin, yet not capturing their strangeness. Curious eyes leaned close. Children pressed fingers to glass to glimpse tooth older than stories, hips older than memory. Paradelopythecus existed again, not in forest, but in whispers of awe, teaching silently across barrier of time. Imagine a solitary bone on table, beneath lamplight. Scientist bent in patience, eyes straining, fingers brushing gently with brush. Quiet room holding tension. This femur once carried living flesh upright beneath canopy. Now here, silent weight upon cloth. Yet in study, it retakes breath. Imagination fills forest around it, places it once again among deer and lions. Air filled with scents of wet leaves. Bone resurrected by curiosity. And this is what they became in modern world. Not only fossils, but windows, opening our vision both backward and inward. Backward into prehistory, inward into our assumption of uniqueness. The public too found fascination, for stories of strange half-known beings always spark imagination. Paradelopythecus joined the gallery of uncanny, standing beside Neanderthals, Denisovans, great apes, echoing whispers in popular books, appearing as curiosity, occasionally mischaracterized, but all the while unsettling. For what most disturbs us is not difference but closeness. And closeness wrapped in strangeness is most haunting of all. Thus the rediscovery did not only advance science, but deepened human humility. To know that Europe itself, our cradle of later civilization, carried echoes of walkers unlike us, but near to us. To realize our cities, our roads, our farms stand over layers of vanished footsteps, reminds that civilization floats thin above abyss of forgotten. Paradelopythecus among the voices too quiet for history's loud page. And so, part 14 closes with strange beauty. The bones uncovered a century ago continue whispering now, not settled with certainty, still debated, still tugging imagination into sunlight. Their presence in museums and in scientific memory ensures that silence did not win fully. Though extinction came, their echo refuses to vanish. Extinction is not only an ending, it is also a mirror, a truth we glimpse reluctantly for when we remember. Paradelopythecus, we do not merely remember a vanished monkey. We remember the fragile contingency of all life, including our own. Their bones tell us more than anatomy. Hips angled upright, spine curved, tail long, muzzle forward. Yes, these whisper facts. But in between the cracks of fossil and reconstruction, in the silence of their vanished calls, lies deeper lesson, that being alive is never guaranteed, that existence is always temporary, that survival for millennia can still end without monument, without witness, without warning. Paradelopythecus, in this way, becomes symbol of impermanence. A story pressed into stone not to glorify progress or triumph, but to remind that chance rules as much as will. That patience is not always enough. That adaptation can endure for ages and then be undone in a handful of centuries. And within this truth, we glimpse ourselves, humanity so often crowned as apex, builder of cities, painter of caves, carver of symbols. Yet even our story floats lightly on a river that erodes everything. Our time too will one day run down. Our bones too will lie under soil, perhaps to be discovered by others we cannot name. The uncanniness of Paradelopythecus sits therefore not simply in their posture, strangely near our own, but in the way they pull our gaze away from triumphalism back toward humility. They force us to admit that reality is wide, that evolution writes many drafts, that our unique form is simply one survivor among many attempted verses, and that the vast majority of verses are erased. If we stand tall, it is because others stood tall and vanished first, their absence making space for our presence, their silence giving stage for our voice. Paradelopythecus is older sibling who did not grow, path cut from forest, so the trail was clearer for us. Not by choice, but by accident. Not by fate, but by chance. This recognition should not diminish us. It should soften us, free us from pride, open us into gratitude for the improbable survival we still cling to. Imagine again a fossil jaw turned in lamplight. To some it is curiosity, yet if we look fully, it is sermon. It is prayer whispered across millions of years. You too will vanish. You too walk only for a while. So walk gently. To hold bone of Paradelopythecus is to hold a mirror not of difference, but of kinship in fragility, even their name. The scientific classification given in sterile syllables speaks indirectly of metaphor. Beside monkey, always near, never central, peripheral, marginal, waiting to be forgotten, but never truly forgotten. Once stone gave back its record. We too one day may be para to someone else's lineage, near but not central, echo remembered in dusty cases. And so Paradelopythecus becomes a reminder that survival is not the same as significance. That meaning arises not only in what lasts, but also in what fades. Extinction too is part of story absence. Too is part of legacy. Silence too is part of song. The story we have walked together does not end in triumph, nor in fanfare. It ends in silence. The silence left by Paradelopythecus when their footsteps faded forever from the soil of Europe. Their bodies folded into earth with no witness except wind and water. Their memory held only in fragments of stone waiting deep below. Yet for a time they stood here. They lived circles of care and vigilance. They carried infants. They played. They grieved. They endured through centuries. And though their kind did not last, they shaped the land simply by having lived upon it. We know them only now through science and imagination. But in our knowing they live once more, haunting the edges of our own story like shadows at twilight. So let us remember this, that every species, even ours, walks only for a while. Survival is a chapter not forever, and every memory is gift borrowed from silence. Paradelopythecus has returned to us in thought tonight, and when we sleep, perhaps their echo still walks across forgotten valleys beneath stars that shine unchanged.